Hello and welcome back to Ethics and Society. And this week's module, Module 9a and b, we'll be looking at the social contract. Last week we looked at Thomas Hobbes. This week we're going to look at John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Stuart Mill in the second half. So we've talked about a social contract. And what I want to do here is kind of give you a sort of one sentence definition. It's a loaded sentence, but it is one sentence that describes the social contract. First of all, it's voluntary. The notion that if we don't like the social contract in a particular community, province, country even, we can move elsewhere and we can live under a different social contract. But those that stay behind are legally binded or bound to, should say, legally bound to this contract. And of course, ourselves, but everyone else. And ultimately, regardless of which theorist you're looking at, this is the idea of an organized society that's brought into being, right? It comes into being and invested with the rights to do certain things. That is to secure mutual protection, right? The life and property of individuals, the welfare of those individuals that enter into the contract, and also to regulate the legal relations amongst its members. So now the system, the social contract, allows us to come into agreement with others in terms of our own specific contracts, a legally binding contract to purchase a home, to rent a property, to work for someone. These are contracts that are legally binding between those two parties. And now we have a legal system that can back it up so that individuals can then turn around and say, hey, I was wronged or I was unfairly dismissed or whatever. All those things that fall under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, such as what we have in Canada, individuals can go and seek recourse by going through the Charter to see whether, for some reason or another, they've been wronged in some legal way. Now, it'll happen sometimes where we have a lot of individuals who feel like they've been wronged. And this is the March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C. back in, I believe, about 2018. I don't know if we're going to see as many of these in the next 4 years. I'd like to think not. And if there is, I'm going to assume there's probably not going to be as many AK-47s sort of strapped across people's chest. It seems like when we are centrist or slightly left, seem to be sort of happy and joyous without having to strap a gun to our backs. So that's going to be a pleasant change. But the point to this picture is that the social contract can be contested, right? There is pushback and there is legal pushback. What we do with that pushback depends a lot of on those that are in power. So we need to consider that. So for John Locke, the two treatises of government, we'll go with this one right here. I just showed you, right? This one here, that's my copy. In Locke's two treatises of government, he talks about natural rights and contract theory. And he talks about a natural right, or what has been called a natural law, as something that we ourselves are born innately believing in. And that is the pursuit of life, health, liberty, possessions. So a natural law is a law of morality that's inherent in human nature. Now, think back to Hobbes, where he says, we have individuals in a state of nature have no morality, right? It's a free-for-all. Locke differs and disagrees with Hobbes by saying, no, we already understand natural law. We have what he calls a light of nature, right? We have reason that allows us to look at a natural law and say, look, this is something valid. This is something worth protecting. So the natural right we have to certain things in a state of nature, we wish to have a system that will protect it, right? Will support it and defend it. And so in the state of nature, we have these natural rights or a natural law, right, towards life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That should sound familiar. Now, by comparison, in a social contract, we have what's called a social right, or you could even call it a legal right, because that concerns positive law. Now, what is positive law? That means that is a law that has been posited by individuals, by a legal institution, a legal system. So we have in a state of nature natural rights, but in a social contract, social rights. And these are brought about by laws that are posited and put down and adhered to by individuals rather than For example, a positive law would not be something that is coming sort of from a theological background. It's coming from a legal background. It has to do with politicians and individuals discussing and agreeing to a certain legal recourse to a particular situation. So they are positive laws in the sense that they are posited down, and they can be measured. So these are humanly created rather than sort of divinely ordained. And they really essentially build up the legal system as we know it. So in this other book here, Questions Concerning the Law of Nature, there's the other book. There it is, kind of shiny. There we go. That's another book I used. In that particular book, Locke really tries to describe in more detail this law of nature. And he talks about it, for example, in folio 11, the law of nature, which each individual can discover by that light alone, which is implanted in us by nature. So that light alone, that's what he calls reason. That's why this whole period is called the Enlightenment, right? It's almost as if a light has gone on and people have looked around going, what? How do we get into this position? We got to change things. So Hobbes and Locke and many other thinkers in the 1600s, right through to the very early 1800s, wrote about these very topics. And Locke looks at individuals in a state of nature as still having this light of reason. So he says, by which that light alone, which is implanted in us by nature, to which too he ought to show himself obedient in everything, and which he perceives as demanding a rational account of his duty. So there's a degree of rationality, a degree of reason. There is a degree of understanding that we should adhere to these laws because it simply is in our favor. It's in our best interest to do it. So with that in mind, with that tool, we'll say, Locke is able to start building his social contract. So he says, this law, right, this law of nature, denoted by these terms, should be distinguished from natural right, for right consists in the fact that we have a free use of something. But law is that which either commands or forbids some action. So yes, in the state of nature, we have this natural right. It is a kind of free for all, but with Locke, people to a certain degree respect one another. But with a law is allowing you to do something, but also a law should allow you to, not allow, it should refrain you from doing something. So the law has this sort of dual purpose. It will protect certain things, but by the same token, it will also forbid other things. So this law of nature can therefore be so described as a law because it is the command of a divine will, knowable by the light of nature. Now, I just finished saying that positive law is not divinely ordained, but in fact is posited by individuals. Here, Locke tries to balance those two forces by saying, okay, positive law is posited by individuals, but the way in which we come to agreement is using reason, and reason is what is divine. This is what connects us with this divine spirit, this divine world, is this capacity to use reason. It is ultimately a gift. It is, and this is how Locke sees it. Hobbes, to a certain degree, but really backpedals it big time because he's got to present individuals in a state of nature as just nothing more than brutes. But Locke is much more discriminatory, much more sort of elegant in his understanding of the state of nature, and elegant in the sense that he gives those individuals the capacity to think. And that's really what it boils down to. So in the end, we have this interesting construction here with a social contract. What we have on this side here, right? We the people, that's us. And what do we have? Well, we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of property and self-worth. And these situations that we find ourselves in that state of nature, we wish to be able to protect ourselves. So what do? We take these equal rights and we bring them over, right? We take them over and transfer them into these executive, legal, and political institutions, and they in turn give us, let's move that back, give us security. So we the people give our power to the executive and legal branches that in turn give us some level of security. And that's essentially what the formula is to maintain this natural right, but import it and protect it in a social contract. So if that is the case, we can also make an argument that not all governments need to be created as a result of force and violence, right? This is a kind of thinking that Hobbes presents us with, still compelling, still valid, but Locke says no, it becomes something that is sort of inexorable, right? It is necessary. It's a next necessary step in our development as human beings, in our history of consciousness, in our history of political institutions and whatever else. But Locke believes that we don't need force and violence to bring this government into being, or this notion that might makes right. No, instead, he thinks that our decision to enter into the social contract, because we have that light of reason, is one that should be viewed as a reasonable, natural, evolutionary step. So it is something inexorable. If you look it up, it simply means a necessary next step. It will happen regardless. So in this case, it is inexorable in the sense that we, in a state of nature, with our light of reason and our understanding of natural rights, we need this, right? We need these institutions to protect what we hold dear already, right? Already in a state of nature. So how is this done? How are these rights protected? Well, partly through political power. And what is that? For Locke, it's actually three things. It's the right of making laws, including the penalty of death, because as enlightened as Locke is, he believes in capital punishment. Two, the regulation and preservation of property, right? It's no longer just belongings or your stuff, right? It's property with receipts and with documentation that proves that you are the rightful owner. So we've got the preservation of property, and also the defense of the Commonwealth, right, from foreign injury, from war, and all that is good for that community, that province, that country, that nation even, to develop and prosper. So political power is all of those things. The right to make laws, including those that will allow the death penalty, protection of property, of course protection of individuals too, but primarily property, and the defense of the Commonwealth, right? The ability to call up an army to protect oneself. So here you have kind of a difference between natural right and social right, right? I'm free as an individual in the state of nature. I'm also free in a social contract, but I remain free as long as I don't commit a capital offense. Because if I do, right? Because remember, I've consented to this, right? I've consented and I'm legally bound to it, because if I commit a capital offense, right, I allow the state to not only take away my freedom by incarcerating me, I also, depending on where you live, right, I allow the state to take my life because of the degree, that intensity and the seriousness of the crime that I've committed. So what we've really been describing all along here is how these natural rights are brought into being as social rights through political power. And we need to consider, first of all, this the state all men are naturally in, which is this notion of perfect freedom. Now, perfect we could put in sort of quotations, because it's perfect to the degree that someone else is not trying to take your stuff, right? We're back to Hobbes again. So Locke believes that we are reasonable individuals in that state of nature, and we are in a state of perfect freedom. This is something we'll see in the next module, the next half, when we talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. His notion of perfect freedom is the one thing that we lose when we enter into a social contract. But we'll see that. We'll talk about that shortly. So Locke believes that we are in a state of perfect freedom, right? In order to allow our actions to result in the possession of belongings, and to dispense of these things as we see fit, to help others if we see fit. It's all things that we can do because we live in perfect freedom. So in a society, individuals are also equal before the law, right? We are subject to the law. Each of us are subjects, but we are subject to the law. And all those powers and jurisdictions are reciprocal, right? Without subordination, subjection. And so we have this idea that everyone, just like in a state of nature, is equal because we're all equally free. Under a legal system, we should allegedly also be free. We have seen protests over this past summer and will continue on, where members of the population clearly do not believe that. And as we see here, right, the U.S. is still working towards this goal of all men or all individuals are equal. This is an ongoing problem because at the time these charters were written, women did not have the vote. They were literally silenced. People of color were silent, disenfranchised, disempowered, and so on. And this is something that is slowly, but again, inexorably being addressed and being resolved. So the notion of a social contract it's an idea. It's an idea that is constantly being tested, but an idea that is resilient enough that there is pushback. There's enough good in it to turn around and say, look, this is not working for us. We need to do something. And we should be grateful that those groups that feel that they have been wronged are not looking for revenge, but just equality. Okay. So the state of nature for Locke is a kind of state of liberty. We can do things, but it's not a state of license in the sense that we have legal recourse to do it. We can simply because we have the opportunity. But there's no license that allows us to say, this is the degree of freedom I have. I can go this far. And so without license or without a legal system, we can really do almost anything. But if people interact with one another, we become social individuals with social rights. We need to build into the law respect, right? Respect for others, for their personhood, their autonomy, their property, if they have it. So that law of nature has to now apply to everyone. And Locke stresses this, even if, yes, that's still not the actual state of affairs, it is certainly an ideal that is built into Locke's social contract. So human reason teaches humankind that because we're equal and independent, no one ought to harm one another because we're all equal. We're all subject under the law. We should all have the same rights and freedoms that our neighbors and anyone else would have. So it's not as if we are looking around and saying that others seem to have more opportunities. Now, that's not including class issues, race issues, issues of gender. Clearly, that's not the case. But again, in an ideal world, this is what Locke is presenting to us. Individuals may act freely in a society, but they are still morally bound to respect one another. And that is certainly something that we should aim at all the time. So in a state of nature, right, one person may overpower another to seek retribution. Now remember, Locke here, we talked last week about retribution versus revenge. And Locke even is saying in a state of nature that we're looking for retribution. So we're already understanding the nature of that act. So it's not revenge, it's retribution. But retribution is about the only time a person can inflict punishment on another person in the social contract, right? And this is part of this idea he has of the death penalty. And Locke believes that this is important because it is both rational and empirical. And what he means by that is the law is rational, right? If you take someone's life or you commit high treason or a crime that is punishable by death, it is rational because it's the crime is clearly bad because it's not something we want other people to do. So it is unreasonable to act this way. But the position is also empirical because at the time Locke was living, public executions were still happening. So we could see empirically, right before our eyes, that the law was working. The law was being enacted upon someone. And yes, horrible behavior meets horrible actions by the state. And that's essentially what was going on. And for Locke, there's a kind of a cause and effect relationship between an action, murder, for example, and the consequences. You forfeit your life. So Locke is not some sort of master logician. It's rather simple. But he says empirically people can see the law at work, and they should see the law at work, but it's also rational. The law makes sense because this kind of behavior left unchecked, now we resort then to a state of nature, which is not what we want. So there are two rights, right? The one of punishment that the state can inflict upon us, and also this notion of reparation or retribution. And this is where the injured party does now have legal recourse to sue someone to recoup damages and so on. And every individual, again, subject under the law because we're all allegedly treated equally. He says, quote, every man has a power to punish the crime, to prevent its being committed again, by the right he has to preserving all mankind and doing all reasonable things he can in order to that end. So if you protect your home, you lock your doors and windows, and someone still breaks in, you have done everything you can to protect yourself. And if someone either breaks into your business and steals your cash out of the till, if there's even cash in tills anymore, but causes damage, but you have done everything you can to protect yourself, then you absolutely have the legal recourse to go after that person for reparation. And if someone is killed in the process, let's say your night guard is there, or some security guard is killed, depending on where you are, that person may also be facing the ultimate sort of retribution, which is the loss of their life, again, depending on where you're living. So for Locke, we can ask ourselves, can we still apply the death penalty for the punishment of lesser breaches of law? No. Locke is clear. This transgression, right, the sin or the commitment or the committing of a crime has to be severe enough that it warrants that response. Remember, it has to be reasonable, right? Yes, it's empirical. The state puts someone to death, but it has to be reasonable. You're not going to put people to death and have them drawn and quartered and hung and everything else for jaywalking. It's illogical. It's unreasonable. But each transgression should be punished to the degree of its seriousness. Jaywalking does not destroy society, but treason might put a political party in danger or a government in danger. So it's the degree and the severity of the crime that matches the punishment. So for Locke, every offense committed in a state of nature must equally be recognized and punished in a commonwealth. So something that would have occurred in a state of nature, which is, for example, murder, because treason's difficult, there are no systems, but certainly murder would be met with punishment by whatever community is there at the time that has suffered that injunction. So this is how Locke is able to say, yes, the good and bad things of a state of nature need to be protected in the social contract. And of course, that includes human life, because that is a natural right. The pursuit of happiness and property as well, but also personhood and autonomy. These things are important. So when we look at the social contract here, right, we have representative government. That means duly elected governments. Equality before the law. We're still working on that. Freedom of the press. That still should be something that is entrenched. Free speech, freedom of assembly, arbitrary assembly. People can randomly come together to protest something. Rights guaranteed by a written constitution. A favored Republican form of government. That doesn't mean that Locke is a Republican. He means that a republic is a government based on the rule of law. So when we talk about the U.S. government being sort of a republic, which it is, it's a government based on the rule of law, which is a strange paradox because there are other governments around the world, but definitely the U.S., that have intertwined religion and the state so deeply together in terms of their legal system that to look at it and say it's a Republican form of government, there's some work left to do, clearly, because the way in which religious ideas and legal ideas sort of marry up rather nicely, again, depending which state you live, but overall the Republican Party is about that. A republic in idea, a republic is a government based on the rule of law. And that's essentially what Locke is presenting to us, a range of laws that can be followed in order for the society to maintain itself. Okay, property requirements, the fact that we can now prove that we own something, that we have purchased something, we've created something, it is ours, identifies the middle class. Well, at the rate Locke was writing, there was no middle class, but it grew out of ideas that protected individuals, that allowed them their pursuit of happiness. The middle class grew out of that. Liberals hope to achieve a free society governed by a constitution that valued individual rights. That's true. More radical groups called Democrats want universal manhood suffrage. Now, these ideas seem sort of not quaint, but a little odd and a little puzzling because, yes, liberals, I mean, a free society is what everyone wants. But it depends on where the government sits, whether they're left, right, or centrist, the degree to which there is freedom. A dictatorship, an oligarchy, a theocracy, the notion of freedom is highly problematic. But at least in a centrist, open government and an open society, there would be a notion of a free society. Individuals can do certain things until they harm others. So it's pretty straightforward. So civil government, ultimately, what is the role? Why would we want to move into this state of nature, from the state of nature to a social contract when we have, according to Locke, perfect freedom, we can do certain things? Well, for Locke, that government actually does something very simple but very important and effective, and that civil government is a proper remedy for the inconveniences of a state of nature. So let's say you need someone to make a judgment on an issue. Two people are contesting, a piece of land that they both believe that they own, right? Some piece of arable land, or, let's say it overlooks a lovely vista, whatever it is, doesn't matter. The point is, civil government in a social contract is a place that we can go to remedy some of these problems, some of these inconveniences. We can certainly sue one another, and we can get these things redressed, and we will be able to speak in front of a judge, or at least in front of a jury. And that third party, that civil government, will then pass a judgment that hopefully will be in our favor, but will pass a judgment because they have nothing to gain from their decision. They will look at the facts on both sides and render a judgment. And this is something that we don't have in a state of nature. We don't have that civil government or legal institution where we can do these things. And so Locke believes that this is very, very important. Magistrate, right, is legally, politically obligated to uphold those natural rights, right, that are already granted to individuals in that state of nature. So any ruling that goes against natural rights, there's something wrong here. There's something wrong with that judgment. And of course, we can push back. And as you can see from the image, there has been lots of pushing back. Over the last 4 years, there have been protests by women, by people of color, by various disenfranchised individuals, because of the fact that the laws have changed dramatically. And at this point, we don't know what we're going to go back to. These can all be revoked. Some of them, yes, absolutely. But for a magistrate to go against what we consider, or certainly what Locke considers, natural rights, we need to be very careful. There has to be a serious reason why that is so. So we're left here in the end with a kind of a chart that we can make some comparisons. We look at Hobbes, Locke, now Rousseau, don't worry about right now. But Hobbes, right, man is evil versus man is good. Hobbes, government is needed to protect the public. Locke, it's wanted, right? It's needed. It's inexorable. It's a next step to benefit the public. And the public at this point are already living in a state of nature. Hobbes, government should be all powerful. It cannot be overthrown. Revolts will be crushed, right? It's an absolute monarch. Locke goes, no, hold on. It's conditional, right? We can overthrow it. Now, Locke is writing well before any serious revolutions have occurred in Western Europe, or even in North America. He's writing in the late 1600s, and it will take almost another 100 years before the first revolutions or the overthrow of a government. Of course, in both cases, it's a monarchy, because you've got the British being overthrown and tossed out of the New World in the U.S., what became the U.S., in 1776. And then we have just about the same time, ironically enough, in France, the same thing. There is, of course, altogether different conditions, but they are both revolutions that overthrow a form of monarchy. In the U.S., it's a kind of monarchy by proxy because they're not there in the New World, but they're in England. And in France, yes, it is the monarchy, the French monarchy, that is overthrown. But Locke sets the kind of foundation, sets these sort of foundational ideas in the minds of individuals that governments should be conditional. Why shouldn't we have the right to overthrow, or at least vote out, a government that we're not happy with? And finally, for Hobbes and Locke, power for Hobbes should not be shared. The executive branch, right, the monarchy, is absolute. It has all power. It is the law. Locke goes, no. bad idea, right? We could end up in a bad situation. And he says, no, power is there. He acknowledges political power, but he says instead, no, we need to share that power. So there should be an executive, a legislative branch, a judicial branch. We should be able to make laws. We should pass political ordinance. We should be able to have a place where we can discuss and debate some of these things. But he says power should be shared equally among these different, established government entities. And this is quite different from Hobbes, because Hobbes says power resides in one person. Okay, so we'll transition to Rousseau, and then we'll take a break and we'll go to the next modules here. So for Locke, we have some ideas here, again, from the Law of Nature book. He talks about that men should keep their compacts, in other words, their contract, is certainly a great and undeniable rule of morality. And the early essays make promises in terms of obligations derived from these laws of nature. Ideas already in the state of nature, because we are enlightened individuals. We see it as an inexorable step into the next realm, right, of our existence. So those early essays, make promises that are based on things already existing, right? Natural rights, the law of nature. And so without that obligation, it's not expected that individuals will stand by the compact because of what has been promised to them, right? They have to look at it and say, what's in it for me? And so the compacts, or these contracts, are more like informal agreements between individuals, but much more formalized and official between individuals themselves as a group and the government. So there is a compact, say with a capital C, that is the social contract we're talking about. But individual compacts can be brought together and come into being between individuals that may not require the absolute blessing of the government. It has the backing of the government, but not necessarily its blessing, in the sense that many contracts are put together. Let's say by a contract, I mean, for example, a lease, right? You don't need to go to City Hall or send it to Ottawa to have it officially stamped, to say, I'm going to rent this apartment from this landlord, and, I need to wait 6 months from the official decree. No, it's not. It's much more informal in the sense that it's between just one or two individuals, or at least two parties. Also, too, when we talk about civil government, the formation of the political civil society that usually referred to when this contract comes into being, what was originally civil society for Hobbes and Locke kind of becomes the middle class. It's where economic interaction is going on. And that's really what that is. That's what the civil society is. It's that middle piece between the state, which lies above us, and the family out of which we grow and move into the civil society of contract writing and lease writing and purchasing and working and interacting with people, mostly on an economic level. That's why the notion of the middle class comes into being. So a compact whereby individuals agree together to enter into one community and make one body politic moves them from a state of nature to a civil society. So the body politic is an idea. First of all, it's not a physical body, of course, but it is a community defined politically. That's all a body politic is. It's a community that is a group of people brought together, and they are defined in terms of their political intent. So the body politic could be sort of the reason why people demonstrate, because that community feels that they are disenfranchised, disempowered, silence. That body politic, that part of it, it's not fully formed, right? Some people are being left out of it, and they wish to be treated equally. So they want to enter into that larger body politic, but you want to have one full body as much as possible. You don't want it disintegrating all the time, because it does not make for a good society. And finally, the original compact, the original contract, is a means by which individuals incorporated with others into one society. Now, yes, we're subject under the law equally, although the way the law treats us may be highly unequal depending on who we are, how rich we are, the color of our skin, and this kind of thing. But that original compact ultimately wishes to bring people together into one society so that we speak with one voice. Now, we'll see this in more detail with Rousseau shortly, but when we talk about the social contract, this transition that Locke is presenting for us as we transition to Rousseau, in both cases, both thinkers are talking about the same thing, and Rousseau kind of takes it a little bit further. But that's why I want to call this a transition. Individuals come together as one society, one full body politic, and each member gives up the power each originally had in the state of nature and gives that power to the majority. And that's why when we talk about elections, for example, that, majority rules, that's what that means. Majority rules, more people voted for this person rather than that person. And that's the end of the discussion. Better luck next time, that kind of thing. But the body politic speaks, and it wishes to change things. It wishes to improve the lot in life of themselves and others. But that body politic speaks, should ideally speak with one voice. And that's really when the body politic works well, that everyone is on the same side. But as you well know, certainly over the last 4 years, we've had dissent, right? Dissent and division to tear apart that body politic, to divide that body politic so it really fights against itself. And you know what happens when people fight amongst themselves? Those in power are busy doing other stuff, right? They don't want people paying attention to them. So that's why dividing a nation is really, really beneficial to those in power. And what happens is we're busy, angry about other things when we're forgetting that we need to all be looking in the same way, in the same direction. So just a little aside here, but, the body politic, the singular body politic is what you need as much as possible. So key points. A more civilized society is based on natural rights that are brought into the social contract and made into social rights. We should all we did live all naturally in a state of perfect freedom and in a state of nature. Locke wishes to enhance that and make it more robust by having a legal political institution or institutions that will support that and hold on to that sense of perfect freedom. And laws, of course, not only allow us to do things, but equally refrain us from doing certain things. So that's important. So in a state of nature as well, transgressions, murder, and other serious crimes are punished to the degree that it will make it an ill bargain for the offenders. What he says will make people think twice, right? Kind of like the Lois Podgman argument from last week that the murderer has done something in the past, is now going to forfeit their right to continue living, but it will also be a deterrent to others, which is why at that time, as these laws are coming into being, that public executions were very allegedly an effective way to hold that population, in fear, right? That's what Hobbes wanted. He wanted that absolute monarch to be able to have that kind of power. And we knew over time that was not the way to do it. There has to be a sharing of power, because otherwise you keep terrifying people. Eventually they've got nothing to lose. And when people have nothing to lose, that's when they get dangerous. Because just keep people just hungry enough and having, enough bills to pay, and they won't do anything because they're busy staying alive. But when you lose everything, that's when a revolt truly happens. And this is what happened in the condition that France found itself in the late 1700s. But this is not for another 100 years. Anyway, so this is part 1 for module 9A on the social contract on John Locke. And I'm just going to take a little break and fill up my cup of tea here. And we're going to carry on with Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Stuart Mill.